The first person to call Earl Mitchell a fool to his face did it in front of a dozen witnesses at the Farmers State Bank in Monmouth, Illinois, on a Tuesday morning in September 1977. What happened next would echo through Warren County for the next 40 years, proving that sometimes the biggest fool in the room is the one doing the name-calling. Earl was 41 years old, farming 480 acres of debt-free land his grandfather had homesteaded in 1889. Not a single mortgage in 88 years. His property tax that morning was $3,475, pocket change compared to what was about to unfold. But standing behind him in line was Dennis Kowalski, a man with 1,800 acres, brand new John Deere equipment worth over $200,000, and a debt load that would make your eyes water. Dennis was loud. Dennis was confident. And Dennis was about to make the worst mistake of his life. "Earl, when are you going to get rid of that old junk and buy some real equipment?" Dennis's voice boomed across the marble floor. Everyone stopped. The tellers froze. Even the bank manager looked up through his office window. Dennis wasn't just making conversation. He was establishing a pecking order, showing everyone who the real farmer was. Earl's 1954 Farmall Super M was 23 years old. It had 14,000 hours on it. The paint was faded, the seat patched with duct tape, surface rust on the hood. But here's what Dennis didn't understand. That tractor was paid for, every single bolt, and it started every morning without fail. "My equipment works fine," Earl said quietly, his face going red. He wasn't used to public confrontation. The Mitchell family didn't do drama. They did math. But Dennis wasn't finished. He stepped forward, playing to his audience now. "That Super M is older than my kids. Hell, it's older than my marriage. You're out there cultivating with a tractor from the Eisenhower administration, while the rest of us are bringing farming into the modern era. It makes the whole county look bad." One of the other farmers chuckled. Bob Henderson, with his shiny 1974 equipment and his own pile of debt, thought this was hilarious. The jokes about Earl's old iron had been running at the grain elevator for years. But Earl had learned something from his father. Never lose your temper in public. Never give them the satisfaction. "It's paid for," Earl said, looking Dennis dead in the eye. "Every piece of equipment I own is paid for. No loans, no notes. I sleep pretty good at night." Dennis laughed, a sharp, echoing bark. "You sleep good because you're not ambitious. You're not trying to build anything. You could be farming twice as much ground if you'd leverage what you have. But you're too scared. You're farming like it's still 1950. Then, Dennis crossed the line. "My dad used to say your dad was the same way. Afraid of his own shadow. Wouldn't take a risk if his life depended on it. I guess the apple doesn't fall far from the tree." The bank went silent. Earl's father, Henry Mitchell, had died 9 years earlier of a heart attack in the field, slumped over the wheel of that same Super M. Henry had survived the Great Depression by being cautious, by watching other farmers lose everything when they borrowed too much. He taught Earl 3 sacred rules. Never borrow more than you can pay back in 1 year. Never put the land itself at risk. Live below your means and save the difference. Now Earl looked at Dennis with steel in his voice. "Your dad lost his farm in 1953. Borrowed too much to expand. Couldn't pay it back when grain prices fell after the Korean War ended. I remember him selling everything at auction that summer. Every piece of equipment, every head of livestock, every stick of furniture. I was 17, and I went to that auction with my dad. I watched your family lose everything because your dad thought he could outsmart the market. You could have heard a pin drop. Maybe you don't remember because you were too young. You would have been what? 9 years old? But I remember. I remember your mother crying. I remember your dad standing there looking like someone had gut-shot him. And I remember my dad turning to me on the drive home and saying, "Never forget what you saw today." That's what happens when you borrow more than you can pay back. Dennis's face went from confident to bright red. His jaw clenched, his hands balled into fists. "That was different," he said, voice tight with anger. "That was bad luck, bad timing." "Maybe," Earl said. "Or maybe it was bad judgment. Maybe it was thinking the good times would last forever. Maybe it was believing the banker when he said you couldn't lose." He looked around at the other farmers. Markets always turn. Prices always go down eventually. The only question is whether you can survive when they do. My dad survived. Your dad didn't. That's not luck. That's preparation. Dennis took a step toward Earl, looking ready to throw a punch, but the bank manager, Tom Schneider, moved fast, putting himself between them. "Gentlemen, this is a bank, not a barn. Take it outside." Dennis glared at Earl one more time, then stormed out without conducting his business. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. But here's what nobody knew that day. This wasn't just an argument. It was a prophecy. Because in 1977, grain prices were good. Land values were climbing 10 to 15% every year. The conventional wisdom, shouted at every Farm Bureau meeting, every agriculture conference, every banker's lunch, said you'd be a fool not to borrow and expand. The economists said it. The government said it. Even the bankers said it, which should have been the biggest warning sign of all. Earl didn't listen. He kept farming his 480 acres with his old iron, saving every penny. When his wife Ruth asked in 1978 if they should buy the neighboring 160 acres for $224,000, Earl did the math. The payment would be $24,000 a year. They'd cleared $32 last year. "The minute we take a loan on land," he told her, "we don't own it anymore. The bank does." They didn't buy. Martin Peters did, borrowing the whole $230,000. Everyone said Martin got a good deal. Land values were going up. He'd make money. Then 1979 arrived, and things got strange. Inflation hit 13%. Paul Volcker became Federal Reserve Chairman and announced he'd do whatever it took to kill inflation, even if it meant causing a recession. Prime rate hit 15%. Farmers who'd borrowed at 8% suddenly couldn't refinance. If you had a balloon payment coming due, your payment could double overnight. But grain prices were still good. Corn hit $3 a bushel, so nobody worried. Farmers bought new pickups, took vacations, built machine sheds. The crisis was just around the corner, visible if you knew what to look for. Earl saw it. It reminded him of stories his father told about 1927, right before the 1929 crash. Prices too good, land values too high, everyone too confident. His father's neighbor, Frank Peterson, had bought 640 acres on credit in the 20s, brand new equipment, even a radio. By 1932, Frank lost everything. Earl watched strangers auction off Frank's wife's furniture while she cried. Now, 50 years later, Earl was watching the same pattern repeat. January 1980, President Carter imposed a grain embargo on the Soviet Union. The largest buyer of American grain vanished overnight. Prices started falling. December 1980, prime rate hit 21.5%. If you'd borrowed at 8%, you couldn't refinance. If your loan had a balloon payment or rate adjustment, you were finished. Corn prices fell to $2.40, then $2.20, then lower. Land values started dropping. Farmers who'd borrowed heavily to expand suddenly found themselves underwater, owing more than their land was worth, unable to make payments with grain prices in the basement. Dennis Kowalski was one of them. By 1982, He was behind on 3 loans. The bank called every week. He sold one John Deere 4630 to make a payment. Then he sold the other. He bought a used tractor to replace them for a quarter of what he'd paid new. In 1983, the bank foreclosed on 600 of Dennis's 1,800 acres. Land he'd paid $1,900 an acre for in 1980 sold for $100 in 1983. He was underwater by $480,000 on just that one parcel. Earl went to that auction, not to gawk, to pay his respects. He stood in the back, watching Dennis and his wife Marie look like they'd been gut-punched. When it was over, Earl walked over. He didn't say, "I told you so." He just said, "I'm sorry, Dennis, this is hard." Dennis looked at him with hollow eyes. "You were right. Back in '77, you were right. I should have listened." "I wasn't right," Earl said. "I was just scared. There's a difference." But Earl had been right, even if he wouldn't claim it. Through 1983, 1984, and 1985, the crisis ground on. Every month, another farm went under. Good farmers, hard-working people, lost everything because they'd borrowed at the wrong time. Earl kept farming his 480 acres with his old equipment. The Super M, now 29 years old, was still running. His neighbors stopped making fun of his old equipment. They started asking questions. "How do you keep that Super M running? Where do you find parts? Can you show me how to rebuild a hydraulic pump?" Earl helped everyone who asked. He let neighbors use his shop, his tools, his expertise. He wasn't trying to profit from the crisis. He was trying to help people survive. In 1986, Dennis gave up. The bank foreclosed on everything. All told, Dennis lost 100 acres, equipment worth over $200 when new, and 20 years of his life. He'd borrowed approximately $2 million between 1974 and 1981. He'd paid back maybe $750,000 in principal and interest, but when the bank sold everything, they only recovered $650,000. Dennis still owed them $200,000, debt that would follow him for years. He got a job at the Caterpillar plant in Galesburg, working nights for $14 an hour. He'd leave home at 10 p.m., get back at 7 a.m., sleep until 2 p.m., and spend the rest of the day trying to remember what it felt like to farm. He never farmed again, couldn't even bear to drive past his old fields. Dennis's remaining 200 acres went to auction in March 1986. Cold Saturday, temperature in the 30s, wind blowing hard. The auction was at the county fairgrounds. The bank didn't want it at Dennis's farm. Too personal, too painful. Earl went to that auction. He'd thought about it for weeks. Part of him wanted to stay home, avoid the appearance of profiting from tragedy. But the practical part his father had instilled knew this was an opportunity. Land was cheap. He had cash. Ruth had asked him the night before, "Are you sure? People will talk." "People always talk," Earl said. "Let them." He'd been saving for 30 years. Every year without an equipment payment, that money went to the bank. He drove old trucks, wore old clothes, fixed things instead of replacing them. He and Ruth took one vacation in 30 years to see her sister in Wisconsin for maybe $200 total. By 1986, Earl had $387,000 in the bank, all cash. Tom Schneider had pulled him aside after church and asked what he planned to do with all that money. "I'm waiting," Earl said, "waiting for land to come back down to where it should be." Now that opportunity had arrived. Dennis's land was divided into 3 parcels. Earl wasn't interested in all of it. The 600-acre piece was too much, the 200-acre piece too small, but the 400-acre piece was perfect. It bordered his farm on 2 sides. The auctioneer started at $1,000 an acre. Bidding climbed to $600, then $650. At $700 an acre, Earl raised his hand for the first time. "Do I hear $750?" the auctioneer called. The other bidder shook his head and sat down. Sold to bidder 47 for $700 an acre. Earl just bought 400 acres for $280,000 total. Dennis had paid $1,900 an acre for that same ground 6 years earlier. Earl walked to the settlement table and pulled out his checkbook. He wrote a check for $280,000. The bank woman looked at the check, looked at Earl, looked back at the check. "Mr. Mitchell, this is for the full amount." "Yes, ma'am." "You're not financing any of it?" "No, ma'am. I'll pay cash." She excused herself to make a phone call. The lawyer was staring at him with amazement. "You have $280,000 in your checking account?" "I have $387,000 in savings," Earl said quietly. "I moved enough to checking this morning." 5 minutes later, she came back. "The check clears." She sounded shocked. Dennis was still standing in the back. Their eyes met. Earl walked over. Dennis looked at him, and for a moment Earl thought he might say something angry. But Dennis just said, voice rough with emotion, "You were right. Back in '77 at the bank, you were right about all of it." "I wasn't right," Earl said. "I was just scared." "No," Dennis said, shaking his head. "You were right. I was a fool. I thought I could outwork the market. Thought if I just got big enough and worked hard enough, I'd be safe. But the market doesn't care how hard you work." He looked at the deed transfer Earl was holding. "Take care of that ground. It's good land, better than the farmer." "You weren't a bad farmer," Earl said. "You just had bad timing." "Bad judgment," Dennis corrected. "You tried to tell me. Hell, your farm tried to tell me just by existing. But I didn't want to listen." Marie touched his arm. "We should go." Dennis extended his hand. They shook. Then Dennis and Marie walked out of the fairgrounds and out of farming forever. Earl stood there holding the paperwork for 400 acres he now owned. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt sad. Dennis had been a good farmer, a hard worker. He just made the wrong bet at the wrong time. And in farming, the market doesn't give you a second chance. Word spread fast. Earl Mitchell, the guy everyone called a fool for keeping old equipment, just bought 400 acres cash while everyone else went broke. The teasing stopped. The jokes stopped. When Earl pulled up to the grain elevator, people treated him with respect. Through the late 80s and 90s, Earl kept farming the same way. In 1993, another adjacent farm came up for sale, 320 acres. Earl paid $190,000 cash. Now he was farming 2,200 acres, all owned free and clear. His son Daniel came back in 1995, after college, with a degree in agricultural economics. He'd learned about modern farming, GPS, precision agriculture. He came home and saw his father farming with tractors from the 60s and 70s. The Super M was 41 years old and still in regular use. "Dad, don't you think it's time to upgrade?" Daniel asked one evening in the shop. Earl was adjusting valves on the Super M's engine. "What's wrong with this tractor?" "Nothing's wrong with it. It's just old." "Could we farm more ground?" Earl interrupted. "Well, no." "Could we grow more bushels per acre?" "That's more about seed genetics." "Could we spend less time in the field?" Daniel paused. "Probably not." "Then what would we gain besides a payment book and debt?" Earl stood up, wiping his hands. "I'm 41 years into a relationship with this machine. I know every bolt, every bearing, every quirk. It owes me nothing. New equipment might be faster, but it costs $150. And you can't fix it yourself. Something breaks. You're calling the dealer and waiting 3 days. Something breaks on this. I fix it in an hour." Daniel learned the philosophy, In 2000, Earl turned 64 and stepped back. Daniel took over. And yes, he bought some newer equipment, but always used, always cash, always repairable. 2008 brought another financial crisis, but grain prices actually went up. Corn hit $7 a bushel. In 2012, farmers went on another buying spree. New combines at $450,000, tractors at $350,000, million-dollar loans. Daniel watched it happen and remembered his father's lessons. He bought land when he could afford it, always cash. By 2015, grain prices were falling again. Corn under $4, soybeans under $9. Farmers who'd bought at the peak were struggling. Once again, there were auctions. In 2016, Frank Peterson lost his farm. He'd bought 800 acres in 2011 at $8,500 an acre, all financed. When prices fell, he couldn't make payments. Daniel went to that auction. He bought 480 of those 800 acres for $4,200 an acre. Just over $2 million he paid cash. The Mitchell family had been saving for 3 generations. Frank approached Daniel after. "Your dad called this, didn't he? Back in the 80s, I didn't listen. Nobody listened." "It's not about being right," Daniel said. "It's about being scared of debt. That fear kept us farming when everyone else went under." Frank nodded slowly. "Tell your dad I finally understand. It only took me 40 years and losing everything, but I understand now." Today, the Mitchell family farms 1,080 acres in Warren County, Illinois. All of it paid for, all of it owned free and clear. In the main shop, in a place of honor, sits that 1954 Farmall Superam. Earl restored it completely in 2018, brought it back to like-new condition. It still runs. It still works. It's 66 years old as of 2020, and it's been part of the Mitchell operation for all 66 years. Painted on the hood in small, neat letters is a phrase Earl put there. Paid for in 1954, still working in 2020. Debt kills, patience wins. Earl Mitchell is 84 years old now. He still lives on the farm, still walks out to the shop most days to tinker. His mind is sharp and his philosophy unchanged. His grandson, Earl Jr., is learning to farm now. 19 years old, studying agricultural engineering at the University of Illinois, but coming home on weekends to work in the shop. Last summer, Earl was teaching his grandson how to rebuild the Super M's carburetor. The tractor was torn apart on the shop floor. "Grandpa," Earl Jr. said, "why do we still use this tractor? I mean, it's cool and everything, but we have newer stuff." Earl led the boy to the window overlooking the farm. "You see that land? All of you 1,060 acres. You know how much debt we have on it?" "None," Earl Jr. said. He'd heard this before. "That's right, none. And you know why?" Earl turned back to the Super M. "Because your great-great-grandfather taught your great-grandfather to be scared of debt. And he taught me. And I taught your father. And now, I'm teaching you." He put his hand on his grandson's shoulder. "This tractor is a reminder. Every time I work on it, I remember that the best equipment is the equipment that's paid for. The best farm is the farm you own. And the best sleep you'll ever get is when you don't owe anybody a dime." Earl Jr. nodded, understanding dawning. "The world's going to try to sell you on debt," Earl continued. "Banks will tell you it's smart to leverage. Dealers will tell you that you need the newest equipment. Other farmers will make you feel like you're falling behind. But remember this, most of those banks will foreclose if you miss 2 payments. Most of those dealers don't care if you can actually afford what they're selling. And most of those other farmers are one bad year away from losing everything." He looked out at the land. "But this farm will be here long after all of us are gone. And the only way to make sure it stays in the family is to never let the bank own it. The minute you take debt on land, it's not yours anymore. Earl Jr. was quiet for a long moment. I get it, Grandpa. I really do. They went back to work, grandfather and grandson, working on a tractor older than both of them combined. Outside, the wind blew across vast 680 acres of paid-for ground. The same wind that blew across this land when Samuel Mitchell first broke the prairie in 1889. The land didn't care about debt or interest rates or farm policy. It would still be there long after all of them were gone, waiting for whoever was wise enough and patient enough to farm it without letting the bank take it away. For now, the Mitchells were still farming it, and if Earl had anything to say about it, they'd still be farming it 3 generations from now, still teaching their grandchildren to be scared of debt, still keeping that old Super M running as a reminder that the simple way, the paid-for way, was the only way that lasted. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe. We share powerful real-life lessons like this every week that could change how you think about money, success, and building something that lasts.